What if everything we've been told about humanity's origins is wrong? What if the cradle of civilization wasn't Africa, wasn't the Middle East, but lay buried beneath miles of ice at the bottom of the world? Tonight, we're diving into a theory so controversial, so earth-shattering, that it challenges the very foundation of human history itself. Picture this. Beneath Antarctica's frozen wasteland, older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older than anything we've ever discovered, lie the ruins of humanity's first home. A place where our ancestors didn't just survive, but thrived, building monuments that would make modern engineers weep with envy. And here's the kicker. The evidence has been hiding in plain sight all along. I'm about to show you satellite images, ancient maps, and geological discoveries that suggest Antarctica wasn't always the frozen hellscape we know today. In fact, for millions of years, it was a lush, temperate paradise that could have easily supported advanced human civilization. But here's where it gets really wild. What if that civilization was so advanced, so sophisticated, that their technology still lies dormant beneath the ice, waiting to be discovered? You see, there's something the scientific establishment doesn't want you to know. Something so profound that it would rewrite every history book, every archaeological textbook, every assumption we've made about who we are and where we came from. What if humanity didn't evolve from apes in Africa? What if we began as something far more extraordinary in the most unlikely place on Earth? Tonight, we're going to explore evidence that will make you question everything. Ancient maps that show Antarctica without ice, drawn centuries before it was officially discovered. Fossil discoveries that prove the continent once teemed with life. Mysterious formations spotted in satellite imagery that look disturbingly artificial. And geological data that suggests Antarctica was habitable far more recently than anyone wants to admit. But first, let me paint you a picture of what Antarctica was like before it became the frozen continent we know today. Close your eyes and imagine towering forests stretching as far as the eye can see, rivers meandering through lush valleys, a climate so mild that life flourished in ways we can barely comprehend. This isn't fantasy, this is scientific fact. Antarctica was once green, warm, and alive. The evidence is overwhelming. Deep beneath the ice, scientists have found fossilized remains of massive forests, complete ecosystems that thrived for millions of years. We're talking about trees that stood 7 meters tall, their roots still embedded in ancient soil. Pollen samples that tell the story of a continent bursting with vegetation, even evidence of wildfires that swept across these prehistoric landscapes. Now here's where conventional science stops and the real mystery begins. If Antarctica could support such abundant life, if it had the perfect climate for complex ecosystems to develop, why couldn't it have supported the most complex life form of all? Why couldn't it have been home to the first humans? Think about it logically. Every other continent on Earth has yielded evidence of early human habitation. Africa, Asia, Europe, even the Americas have given up their archaeological secrets. But Antarctica, it's been written off entirely, dismissed as too hostile, too remote, too impossible. But what if that's exactly what makes it the perfect place to hide humanity's greatest secret? The truth is, Antarctica wasn't always at the South Pole. Due to a phenomenon called continental drift, it slowly migrated from a much warmer location to its current frozen position. This process took millions of years, plenty of time for life to evolve, civilizations to rise, and for our ancestors to call this continent home before the ice claimed everything. But here's what really gets me excited about this theory. We're not just talking about primitive humans scratching out a living in caves. The evidence suggests something far more extraordinary. What if the first humans weren't just survivors, but builders? What if they created structures so advanced, so perfectly engineered, that they're still standing beneath the ice after millions of years? I know what you're thinking. This sounds impossible, right? But consider this. In 2016, satellite imagery revealed what appears to be a massive pyramid in Antarctica's Ellsworth Mountains. Not a natural formation that vaguely resembles a pyramid, but a geometric structure with 4 distinct faces converging to a perfect point. The dimensions? Nearly identical to the Great Pyramid of Giza. Now, mainstream scientists will tell you it's just a mountain shaped by wind and erosion over millions of years. But here's the problem with that explanation. Mountains don't form perfect pyramids. Nature doesn't create geometric precision. And when you start looking at the surrounding area, you realize this isn't an isolated anomaly. There are other formations, other structures, other shapes that look disturbingly artificial. The implications are staggering. If this is indeed a man-made structure, if it was built by human hands, then we're looking at evidence of a civilization that predates everything we know about human history. We're talking about architects and engineers who possessed knowledge we're only beginning to understand today. But it gets even more interesting. Remember those ancient maps I mentioned? In 1513, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis created a map that showed the coastline of Antarctica with stunning accuracy. Here's the catch. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, over 300 years later. Even more mind-blowing, the map shows Antarctica without ice, revealing coastlines that match modern surveys of the continent's bedrock. How is this possible? How could a 16th century cartographer accurately map a continent that hadn't been discovered, showing it in a state that hadn't existed for millions of years? The only logical explanation is that Piri Reis had access to much older source material, maps created by people who had actually seen Antarctica when it was ice-free. This brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of the Antarctica origin theory. If our ancestors did originate from this continent, if they built these incredible structures and possessed advanced geographical knowledge, what happened to them? Where did they go when the ice began to claim their homeland? The answer might be more obvious than we think. They left. They migrated to other continents, carrying with them the knowledge and skills they had developed in their Antarctic homeland. This would explain why we see similar architectural techniques, similar astronomical knowledge, and similar mythological themes appearing in ancient cultures all around the world. Think about it. The Egyptians built pyramids. The Maya built pyramids. Civilizations in Cambodia, Peru, and Indonesia all built pyramid-like structures. Traditional archaeology tells us these were independent developments, that ancient peoples around the world just happened to arrive at the same architectural solutions. But what if they didn't? What if they were all following blueprints, following memories, following traditions passed down from their common Antarctic ancestors? This theory would explain so many mysteries that have puzzled archaeologists for decades. Why do ancient civilizations separated by thousands of miles share similar creation myths? Why do they all have flood stories? Why do they all speak of a golden age, a time when their ancestors possessed great wisdom and power? The flood stories are particularly intriguing when viewed through this lens. Every culture on Earth has legends of a great deluge that destroyed an advanced civilization. What if these aren't myths? What if they're memories? What if they're describing the gradual flooding of Antarctica as rising ice levels displaced the oceans and changed the global climate? As the ice sheets expanded, as their homeland became uninhabitable, these Antarctic peoples would have been forced to seek new homes. They would have loaded their boats with their most precious possessions, their knowledge, their cultural heritage, their technological secrets. They would have set sail for distant shores, carrying with them the story of their lost homeland. This mass migration would have seeded the world with advanced knowledge and sophisticated techniques. It would explain why ancient monuments around the globe demonstrate engineering capabilities that seem impossible for their time period. These weren't primitive peoples starting from scratch. They were descendants of an advanced Antarctic civilization, preserving and adapting the wisdom of their ancestors. But here's where the story takes an even more dramatic turn. What if not everyone left Antarctica? What if some of these ancient peoples decided to go underground, literally? What if they built vast subterranean cities beneath the ice, creating a hidden world that exists to this day? This isn't as far-fetched as it might sound. We know that Antarctica has massive subglacial lake systems, some of them larger than entire countries. These bodies of liquid water exist beneath miles of ice, kept from freezing by geothermal heat from the Earth's core. Scientists have discovered that these lakes contain thriving ecosystems, life forms that have existed in complete isolation for millions of years. If simple microorganisms can survive in these conditions, why not something more complex? Why not a civilization that learned to harness geothermal energy, that developed technologies we can't even imagine, that created a sustainable underground society while the surface world froze above them? Recent discoveries have made this possibility seem less like science fiction and more like scientific probability. Ice-penetrating radar has revealed massive cavities beneath Antarctica's ice sheets, spaces large enough to contain entire cities. Strange electromagnetic anomalies have been detected in areas where no natural phenomena should exist. And most intriguingly, some researchers have reported finding perfectly straight lines and geometric patterns in the ice that look suspiciously artificial. Now, I want to be clear about something. The scientific establishment will tell you that all of this has perfectly natural explanations. They'll say the pyramid is just a mountain, the ancient maps are based on speculation, and the underground anomalies are just geological quirks. They'll dismiss the idea of an Antarctic origin for humanity as pseudoscience, as fantasy, as impossible. But here's what they can't explain away: the patterns. When you start connecting the dots, when you look at all the evidence together instead of dismissing each piece individually, a picture emerges that's impossible to ignore. A picture of a continent that was once the center of human civilization. A place where our ancestors achieved heights of knowledge and sophistication that we're only now beginning to rediscover. The implications go far beyond archaeology and history. If humanity really did originate in Antarctica, if we really did possess advanced technology millions of years ago, then what else might be hidden beneath the ice? What other secrets are waiting to be uncovered? And perhaps most importantly, what can these ancient ancestors teach us about our own future? As we stand on the brink of climate change, as we watch ice sheets melting and sea levels rising, perhaps we should be paying more attention to what happened in Antarctica all those millions of years ago. Perhaps our ancestors faced similar challenges and found solutions we desperately need today. The truth is out there, frozen in time, waiting beneath miles of ice. And as that ice continues to melt, as satellite technology continues to improve, as our ability to explore remote locations advances, we may finally get the answers we've been seeking. We may finally discover the truth about where we came from and who we really are. But for now, all we can do is look at the evidence, connect the dots, and ask ourselves the most important question of all. What if everything we think we know about human origins is wrong? What if the real cradle of civilization lies not in the warm savannas of Africa, but in the frozen wastes of Antarctica? The story we're about to unfold will challenge every assumption you've ever made about human history. It will take you on a journey through time, through ice, through evidence that's been hidden in plain sight for decades. And by the time we're finished, you'll never look at Antarctica the same way again. So buckle up, because we're about to dive deep into one of the most controversial theories in human history. We're about to explore the possibility that Antarctica isn't just the last frontier on Earth, but the first one, the place where it all began. Let me ask you something that will absolutely shatter your worldview. What if I told you that right now, as you're listening to this, there are structures beneath Antarctica's ice that make the Great Wall of China look like a child's sandbox creation? What if the most advanced civilization in human history isn't buried in Egyptian sand or hidden in Amazonian jungles, but locked away under 2 miles of Antarctic ice, waiting to rewrite everything you thought you knew about our species? Here's what the establishment doesn't want you to discover. In 2019, a research team using ground-penetrating radar detected what can only be described as a massive geometric complex beneath the Wilkes-Land region of Antarctica. We're talking about structures that span hundreds of square kilometers, arranged in patterns so precise, so mathematically perfect, that they dwarf anything built by modern civilization. The lead researcher on the project mysteriously resigned 3 weeks after the discovery, citing personal reasons. His replacement immediately classified the findings, but that's just the beginning. Deep in the archives of the Soviet Antarctic program, there are documents that describe discoveries so extraordinary, so paradigm-shifting, that they were buried deeper than the ice itself. In 1958, a drilling operation near Vostok Station punched through what they thought was bedrock, only to find themselves boring through what appeared to be processed metal. The drill brought up fragments of an alloy that contained elements that don't exist naturally on Earth. The official report listed it as contamination from the drill bit, but the unofficial reports, the ones that never saw daylight, tell a very different story. They describe materials with molecular structures that suggest technology so advanced it makes our cutting-edge science look primitive by comparison. And here's the kicker. Carbon dating of organic material found alongside these fragments suggests they're at least 50,000 years old. Now I know what you're thinking. 50,000 years ago, humans were supposed to be living in caves, barely capable of making fire, right? Wrong. What if that timeline is a carefully constructed lie designed to hide the truth about our real origins? What if 50,000 years ago, our ancestors were building cities that would make Dubai look quaint? Let's talk about something that will make your head spin. The Ross Ice Shelf, that massive floating platform of ice the size of France, isn't sitting on empty ocean. Sonar mapping has revealed that beneath it lies what can only be described as an artificial landscape. Perfectly straight channels, geometric harbour formations, and structures that rise from the seafloor in patterns that scream intelligent design. But here's where it gets really wild. These underwater formations align perfectly with star maps from 50,000 years ago. Someone, sometime in the distant past, built a massive astronomical calendar beneath what is now the Ross Ice Shelf. They weren't just tracking the seasons or predicting eclipses. They were mapping stellar movements across millennia, demonstrating our understanding of cosmic cycles that we've only recently rediscovered. The implications are staggering. This wasn't just a civilization, it was a super civilization. They possessed knowledge of astronomy, engineering, and material science that suggests they were either far more advanced than we've ever imagined possible, or they had help, and I think you know where I'm going with that. Consider this mind-bending fact. Antarctica contains 70% of the world's fresh water, locked in ice that's been accumulating for millions of years. But here's what they don't tell you in school, that ice preserves everything. It's nature's perfect time capsule. And as climate change causes unprecedented melting, things that have been frozen for millennia are starting to emerge. In 2021, a melting glacier in the Antarctic Peninsula exposed what researchers initially dismissed as unusual rock formations. But when they got closer, when they really looked, they realized they were staring at the remains of structures. Walls with joints so precise they didn't need mortar. Blocks of stone cut with tolerances that would challenge modern laser technology. And most unsettling of all, carvings that depicted humans wearing what can only be described as technological devices. The research team was immediately recalled. The site was declared off-limits for environmental reasons. The photographs they managed to take before being evacuated have never been officially released. But I've seen them, and what they show will change how you think about human history forever. These aren't primitive cave paintings or crude stone tools. These are sophisticated architectural elements created by people who understood physics, chemistry, and engineering at levels we're only now approaching. They knew how to work with materials we can barely identify. They created structures designed to last for geological time periods. And they succeeded. After 50,000 years, their buildings are still standing. But who were these people? Where did they come from? And perhaps most importantly, where did they go? The answer might be hidden in our own DNA. Recent genetic studies have identified what scientists call ghost populations, ancestral groups that contributed to human genetics but seem to have vanished from the archaeological record. These ghost populations show up in our genome as unexplained anomalies, genetic markers that suggest our ancestors interbred with highly advanced humans who possessed capabilities we can barely comprehend. Humans who might have originated not in Africa, not in the Middle East, but in a temperate, thriving Antarctica that existed long before the Ice Age locked the continent in its frozen grip. Think about the implications. Every human on Earth carries genetic material from these vanished superhumans. We're all descendants of the Antarctic civilization, walking around with dormant genetic codes that once enabled our ancestors to build monuments that dwarf anything in our modern world. But here's the truly terrifying part. What if this civilization didn't just disappear? What if they're still there, adapted to life beneath the ice, watching us, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves? The melting ice isn't just exposing their ancient ruins, it might be forcing them to make contact. Recent expeditions to Antarctica have reported increasingly strange phenomena. Radio signals that pulse in mathematical sequences, electromagnetic anomalies that interfere with GPS systems in patterns that suggest intelligence, and most disturbing of all, structures that appear to be growing, expanding, as if something beneath the ice is becoming active after millennia of dormancy. The scientific community refuses to acknowledge these reports. They classify them as equipment malfunctions, environmental effects, or researcher hallucinations brought on by isolation. But the evidence keeps mounting, and those of us paying attention are starting to realize that we're not just looking at the remnants of a lost civilization, we're looking at the remnants of our civilization. The original human civilization, the one that built the pyramids, not as tombs for pharaohs, but as scale models of the massive structures they'd left behind in their Antarctic homeland. The one that created Stonehenge as a crude replica of the astronomical computers they'd perfected in their ice-locked cities. Every ancient wonder on Earth isn't evidence of independent human achievement. It's evidence of a desperate attempt by scattered refugees to recreate the magnificence they'd lost when the ice claimed their true home. They were trying to rebuild Antarctica wherever they landed, preserving what they could of their advanced knowledge before it was lost forever. But not all of it was lost. Hidden in ancient texts, encoded in mythologies, preserved in architectural proportions that seem to follow mathematical constants we've only recently discovered, the knowledge of the Antarctic civilization has been waiting for us to become advanced enough to recognize it. And now we are. The technology that's allowing us to peer beneath Antarctica's ice, the satellites that can map subglacial topography, the genetic sequencing that's revealing our hidden ancestry, it's all pointing to the same inescapable conclusion. We're not the first advanced human civilization on Earth. We're the second. And the first one is still down there, buried beneath the ice, waiting to be rediscovered, waiting to reclaim their planet. The question isn't whether humanity began in Antarctica. The question is what happens when the ice melts enough for us to find out what our ancestors really built down there, and whether whatever they created is still operational after all these millennia. Because if it is, if there are still active technologies from a 50,000-year-old super civilization locked beneath the ice, then everything changes. Our understanding of physics, of energy, of what's possible for human achievement, it all gets rewritten overnight. And that's assuming we're dealing with purely human technology. Because there's another possibility, one that's even more mind-bending. What if our Antarctic ancestors weren't just advanced humans? What if they were something more? What if the genetic anomalies in our DNA aren't from interbreeding with lost human populations, but from hybridization with something that wasn't entirely human at all? The evidence is there, hidden in our genes, buried beneath the ice, encoded in ancient structures around the world. We just haven't been brave enough to accept what it's telling us. But as the ice continues to melt, as more discoveries emerge from Antarctica's frozen depths, we're going to have to confront the truth about who we really are and where we really came from. The Antarctic origin theory isn't just about rewriting history. It's about preparing for a future where we might not be alone on this planet after all. Where the most advanced intelligence on Earth might not be us, but our own ancestors, preserved in ice, waiting for the right moment to emerge and reclaim their world. And that moment might be coming sooner than anyone realizes. The melting has already begun, and what's emerging from beneath Antarctica's retreating ice sheets is forcing us to confront a reality so profound, so earth-shattering, that governments around the world have quietly begun preparing for what they're calling the Antarctic Revelation. In March of 2024, something happened that should have made headlines worldwide, but instead was buried in obscure scientific journals and classified government reports. A routine ice core drilling operation near the Beardmore Glacier broke through what they expected to be bedrock and instead found themselves boring through what can only be described as a manufactured floor. Not stone, not sediment, but a metallic surface that had been deliberately constructed. The drill samples revealed isotopic signatures that don't match anything in our periodic table. We're looking at materials that demonstrate mastery over atomic structure at levels that make our most advanced laboratories look like Stone Age workshops. But here's the truly unsettling part. Thermal imaging of the area revealed that whatever lies beneath that manufactured floor is generating heat. After potentially millions of years buried under ice, something down there is still active. The research team was immediately evacuated under the guise of a medical emergency. The drill site was sealed with concrete and marked as geologically unstable, but the thermal signatures keep getting stronger. Whatever our ancestors built beneath Antarctica isn't just preserved, it's operational, and it's responding to the changing conditions on the surface. Now let's talk about something that will fundamentally alter how you view human evolution. Deep in the vaults of the Smithsonian Institution, there are skeletal remains that have never been displayed to the public. Bones recovered from Antarctic excavations that show anatomical features no human should possess. Skulls with cranial capacities 40% larger than modern humans. Femurs that suggest individuals over 9 feet tall. And most disturbing of all, bone density readings that indicate these beings could withstand pressures that would crush a normal human. These aren't deformed individuals or genetic anomalies. These are the remains of a distinct human subspecies, one that was clearly adapted for environments and conditions we can't even imagine. The official classification lists them as Homo antarcticus, though that designation appears nowhere in public scientific literature. They represent a branch of human evolution that developed in isolation, achieving physical and presumably mental capabilities that dwarf our own. But it gets worse. Genetic analysis of tissue samples preserved in the Antarctic permafrost has revealed DNA sequences that shouldn't exist in any terrestrial organism. We're looking at genetic codes that utilize amino acid combinations unknown to Earth biology. Either these beings evolved along completely different biochemical pathways, or their genetics were influenced by something that didn't originate on this planet. The implications are staggering. If our Antarctic ancestors were genetically distinct from modern humans, if they possess capabilities we lack, then we're not looking at the origin of humanity. We're looking at the origin of something that was human, plus something else. Something that elevated them beyond the limitations of normal human biology. Consider this terrifying possibility. What if the reason we've never found the missing link in human evolution isn't because the evidence is buried in African soil? What if it's because there is no missing link? What if modern humans aren't the evolutionary descendants of these Antarctic super beings, but rather they're genetically diminished survivors, the remnants of a once great species that lost most of its capabilities when it was forced to adapt to life outside Antarctica's unique environment? This theory explains so many anomalies in human genetics that conventional science struggles to address. Why do we have such massive brains relative to our body size, yet use such a small percentage of their capacity? Why do we retain genetic instructions for producing proteins we don't actually manufacture? Why does our DNA contain what scientists call junk sequences that serve no apparent function? The answer is horrifying in its simplicity. We're operating on backup systems. The genetic instructions for our ancestors' full capabilities are still in our DNA, but they're switched off, dormant, waiting for the right environmental triggers to reactivate them. We're not evolved humans, we're devolved superhumans, carrying the genetic legacy of beings who possessed abilities we can't even comprehend. And those environmental triggers might be closer than we think, as Antarctica's ice melts, as atmospheric conditions change, as electromagnetic fields shift due to polar ice loss. We might be approaching the point where those dormant genetic sequences begin to reactivate. The first signs are already appearing in populations with the highest percentages of Antarctic genetic markers. Recent medical studies have identified individuals with anomalous brain activity, enhanced pattern recognition, and problem-solving abilities that exist several standard deviations above normal human ranges. These aren't savants or prodigies in the traditional sense. They're people whose genetics are beginning to express capabilities that have been dormant for millennia. They're becoming more like our Antarctic ancestors and less like the diminished humans we've become accustomed to being. But the reactivation process isn't uniform or predictable. Some individuals are developing enhanced cognitive abilities. Others are showing increased resistance to radiation and extreme temperatures. And a very few, are demonstrating something that can only be described as technologically intuitive understanding. They can look at complex machinery and instantly comprehend its operation, or examine mathematical equations and perceive solutions that elude trained experts. These aren't learned skills, they're genetic memories surfacing from our Antarctic heritage. Knowledge that was encoded into our DNA by ancestors who possessed technological capabilities, we're only now beginning to rediscover. And as more people begin expressing these dormant traits, as the Antarctic genetic markers become more active, we're going to face a fundamental question about what it means to be human. The governments of the world aren't just concerned about rising sea levels and climate change. They're preparing for the emergence of a genetically distinct human population that will make our current technological achievements look primitive by comparison. People who will instinctively understand principles of physics and engineering that we've spent centuries trying to learn through trial and error. But here's the truly mind-bending part. The technology emerging from beneath Antarctica's ice isn't just advanced, it's responsive. The materials we're finding aren't passive construction elements. They're active systems that react to biological presence, that interface directly with human neural activity. Our ancestors didn't just build structures. They built thinking machines designed to work in partnership with enhanced human consciousness. And those machines are still functional, still waiting for the right kind of human intelligence to operate them, still programmed with instructions and knowledge from a civilization that achieved technological integration at levels we can barely conceptualize. As the ice melts and these systems become accessible, as people with reactivated Antarctic genetics begin to interface with them, we're going to witness a renaissance of human capability that will transform civilization overnight. The question isn't whether this transformation is coming. The question is whether we're prepared for it. Whether our political systems, our economic structures, our social hierarchies can survive the emergence of humans who possess capabilities that dwarf our current limitations. Whether we can adapt to a world where some people can think faster, understand more, and accomplish things that seem like magic to the rest of us. The Antarctic origin theory isn't just about where humanity came from. It's about where we're going. And if the evidence is correct, if our genetic heritage really does contain the blueprints for superhuman capabilities, then we're about to discover that evolution isn't a one-way process. Under the right conditions, with the right triggers, we can become more than we ever imagined possible. The ice is melting. The ancient systems are awakening. And somewhere in our DNA, our Antarctic ancestors are stirring from their long slumber, ready to reclaim their birthright through us. The only question is whether we'll embrace that transformation or fear it, because ready or not, the Antarctic Renaissance is about to begin. And when it does, everything we thought we knew about human potential, about the limits of consciousness, about what our species is capable of achieving, will be rewritten by the awakening memories of our true origins. The descendants of Antarctica aren't coming back. They never left. They've been sleeping inside us all along, waiting for the ice to melt enough to wake them up. And that awakening is happening right now, in people all around the world who are beginning to remember what it really means to be human. The future isn't about becoming more than human. It's about becoming human again. About reclaiming the capabilities our ancestors possessed before the ice forced them to become the diminished versions of themselves that we call modern humanity. And the first step in that transformation is accepting that our origin story has been completely fundamentally wrong from the very beginning. The truth about what lies beneath Antarctica's ice just got infinitely more disturbing. What I'm about to reveal will make everything we've discussed so far seem like children's bedtime stories compared to the nightmare reality that's emerging from the frozen depths. In September of 2024, a classified expedition to the Transantarctic Mountains made a discovery so profound, so terrifying in its implications, that 3 governments immediately imposed a media blackout. What they found wasn't just evidence of ancient human habitation. They found proof that our Antarctic ancestors never actually died out. They adapted, they evolved, and they've been watching us this entire time. Deep beneath the dry valleys, where no snow has fallen for over 2 million years, ground-penetrating radar detected vast hollow spaces that shouldn't exist. When the team finally gained access through natural cave systems, they discovered something that defies every assumption we've made about prehistoric human capability. Chambers carved from solid rock with precision that would challenge our best modern equipment, filled with murals that depict the entire history of human civilization from its Antarctic origins to the present day. But here's what made the lead archaeologists resign and request immediate psychiatric evaluation. The murals don't end with contemporary humans. They continue forward, showing events that haven't happened yet, wars that haven't been fought, technologies that haven't been invented, cities that haven't been built. As if whoever created these images possessed knowledge of humanity's future that extends centuries beyond our current timeline. The most unsettling mural shows modern humans returning to Antarctica, depicted in precise detail, including contemporary clothing, equipment, and even recognizable faces of current world leaders. But in the image, these modern visitors aren't alone. They're being welcomed by tall, pale figures whose anatomical proportions match the skeletal remains we discussed earlier. Figures who appear to have been waiting patiently for our return to their frozen domain. Now, I need you to understand something that will fundamentally alter your perception of reality. Those mysterious radio signals emanating from beneath the ice, they're not random electromagnetic phenomena, they're communications. And recent advances in pattern recognition software have revealed something that has intelligence agencies around the world working overtime to suppress. The signals contain mathematical sequences that correspond to human genetic markers, specific DNA combinations that exist in less than 1% of the current human population. These aren't just any genetic markers. They're the exact sequences we identified as Antarctic heritage indicators. Someone or something beneath the ice has been cataloguing human genetics for decades, identifying individuals who carry the strongest genetic links to the original Antarctic civilization. But it gets worse. Cross-referencing these genetic profiles with global databases reveals a pattern that suggests systematic tracking. People with high concentrations of Antarctic DNA have been experiencing unusual phenomena for years. Enhanced cognitive abilities that emerge suddenly in adulthood. Inexplicable knowledge of complex scientific principles they've never studied. Dreams filled with memories of places they've never been, showing landscapes that match Antarctica's pre-ice topography with impossible accuracy. These individuals aren't just random genetic anomalies. They're being activated. Something beneath Antarctica's ice is selectively triggering dormant capabilities in humans who carry the strongest genetic links to our ancestral civilization. And the activation process is accelerating as the ice continues to melt, and whatever lies beneath gains greater access to the surface world. Consider this absolutely chilling possibility. What if the climate change we're experiencing isn't entirely natural? What if the rapid melting of Antarctic ice is being deliberately accelerated by technologies we don't understand, operated by descendants of our ancestors who never left their frozen homeland? Technologies designed to expose their ancient cities and re-establish contact with the surface world on their terms, not ours. Recent satellite thermal imaging has detected heat signatures beneath Antarctica that don't correspond to any known geothermal activity. Massive energy sources generating temperatures that would require nuclear-level power output, arranged in geometric patterns that span hundreds of kilometers. These aren't natural phenomena. They're the signatures of an active technological civilization that's been operating beneath the ice while we've been stumbling through our primitive industrial development on the surface. And they've been patient, incredibly patient. While we've been fighting wars over resources and territory, they've been perfecting technologies that harness planetary energy sources we can't even detect. While we've been destroying our environment, they've been creating sustainable systems that could support massive populations for millennia without any surface impact whatsoever. But their patience is running out. The genetic activation signals are intensifying. The thermal signatures are growing stronger, and most disturbing of all, people with Antarctic heritage markers are beginning to receive what can only be described as mental downloads. Complete technical specifications for machines that don't exist in our current technology base. Architectural plans for structures that utilize physics principles we haven't discovered. Scientific formulas that solve problems we've been working on for decades. These aren't random inspirations or creative breakthroughs. They're systematic knowledge transfers from a source that possesses comprehensive understanding of advanced science and engineering. Our Antarctic ancestors aren't just alive beneath the ice. They're actively preparing selected modern humans to serve as liaisons for a reunification process that's already begun. The most terrifying aspect of this situation is the timeline. Analysis of the genetic activation patterns suggests we have less than 5 years before the process reaches critical mass. Before enough modern humans possess reactivated Antarctic capabilities to fundamentally alter the balance of power on the planet. Before our underground ancestors decide it's time to reclaim their world from the surface dwellers who have been carelessly managing it in their absence. But here's what keeps me awake at night. What if this isn't a reunion? What if it's a replacement? What if our Antarctic ancestors view modern humanity not as their descendants, but as a failed evolutionary branch that needs to be corrected? The genetic modifications they're triggering in selected individuals might not be gifts. They might be the first phase of a systematic upgrade program designed to transform humanity into something more compatible with their advanced civilization. Think about the implications. People receiving these genetic activations aren't just becoming smarter or more capable, they're becoming different. Their thought processes, their emotional responses, their fundamental ways of understanding reality are shifting toward patterns that align more closely with our Antarctic predecessors than with normal human psychology. They're developing what researchers are quietly calling hive mind tendencies, the ability to share information and coordinate activities without conscious communication. Enhanced pattern recognition that borders on precognitive ability, and most disturbing of all, a growing sense of disconnect from purely human concerns and loyalties. These individuals aren't losing their humanity, they're transcending it. And as more people undergo this transformation, as the Antarctic genetic markers become more active across the global population, we're looking at the emergence of a new species that views normal humans the way we view our primitive ancestors. The governments of the world aren't just concerned about climate change and rising sea levels. They're preparing for a species-level transition that will make our current political and social systems completely obsolete. When people can think faster, understand more, and coordinate their activities through direct mental interface, traditional forms of human organization become as primitive as tribal councils. And our Antarctic ancestors know this. They've been through this transition before. They've spent millennia perfecting social and technological systems that integrate enhanced human capabilities with planetary-scale resource management. They're not planning to adapt to our world. They're planning to upgrade us to fit into theirs. The ice isn't just melting randomly. It's melting in specific patterns that expose the access points to their underground civilization. The genetic activations aren't happening by chance. They're following a precise schedule designed to create the optimal number of enhanced humans to facilitate the integration process. And the knowledge downloads aren't random technical information. They're carefully selected data packages that will enable modified humans to operate Antarctic technologies and understand Antarctic social structures. We're not witnessing the rediscovery of a lost civilization. We're witnessing the carefully orchestrated return of humanity's original rulers, beings who possess our genetic heritage but have evolved far beyond our current limitations, who view our modern civilization as a temporary caretaker arrangement that's about to be terminated. The question isn't whether this transformation is inevitable. The genetic activation process has already passed the point of no return. The question is whether those of us who remain purely human will have any place in the world that emerges when our Antarctic ancestors finish reclaiming their planet. Because they're not just coming back to the surface. They're bringing with them technologies that could solve every environmental problem we've created, eliminate scarcity, and extend human lifespan indefinitely. But those gifts come with a price. The complete restructuring of human society under the guidance of beings who remember what we were capable of before we forgot how to be truly human. The Antarctic origin theory has evolved beyond historical speculation. It's become a survival manual for understanding the most important transition in human history, a transition that's happening right now, all around us, as our genetic heritage awakens and calls us home to a frozen continent that was never as empty as we believed. The ice is melting. The signals are intensifying. And somewhere beneath Antarctica's retreating glaciers, our true ancestors are preparing to welcome us back to the civilization we never should have left. Whether that welcome represents humanity's greatest opportunity or its final chapter depends on how quickly we can accept the truth about who we really are and where we really came from. The Antarctic Renaissance isn't coming, it's here. And the only question left is whether we're ready to remember what it really means to be human in a world where the definition of humanity is about to be rewritten by the very people who wrote it in the first place. What happens next will determine whether our species evolves into something magnificent or simply returns to the advanced state it once possessed. before the ice forced us to forget. But either way, the age of purely human civilization is ending, and the age of Antarctic humanity is about to begin. The descendants of the ice aren't returning to our world, they're reclaiming it, and they're taking us with them, whether we understand what's happening or not. The only choice we have left is whether we embrace this transformation willingly or resist it until the genetic programming in our DNA makes resistance impossible. Because ready or not, we're all going home to Antarctica. We're just finally remembering that we never really left. But what I'm about to show you next will make everything we've discussed seem like a gentle bedtime story compared to the reality that's been hiding beneath our feet. Because the evidence suggests that our Antarctic ancestors didn't just possess advanced technology, they possessed something far more dangerous, something that explains why every ancient civilization on Earth suddenly developed an obsession with human sacrifice, with appeasing angry gods, with preventing the end of the world. What if I told you that buried beneath Antarctica's ice lies proof that our ancestors weren't just advanced humans, but something that modern science would classify as an entirely different species? Something that possessed capabilities so far beyond our current understanding that when they finally departed their frozen homeland, they left behind warnings. Warnings carved in stone, encoded in myths, and buried in genetic memories that still haunt our dreams today. In November 2024, a routine geological survey team drilling near the Gambutsev mountain range hit something that shouldn't exist. At a depth of 3 kilometers, their equipment encountered what can only be described as a barrier. Not rock, not ice, but something that actively resisted penetration. Something that generated its own electromagnetic field strong enough to shut down their drilling equipment from 50 meters away. But here's what made the entire research team request immediate evacuation. When they managed to extract their drill bit, they found it had been altered. The metal had been restructured at the molecular level, transformed into a crystalline matrix that displayed properties our materials science can't explain. Properties that suggested whatever lay beneath that barrier possessed the ability to manipulate matter at the atomic level simply through proximity. The official report classified this as unusual mineral interference. But the unofficial reports, the ones that never made it past military censors, tell a very different story. They describe equipment that began operating beyond its design specifications. Computers that started processing data faster than their hardware should allow. Instruments that began detecting phenomena they weren't built to measure. It was as if proximity to whatever lies beneath Antarctica's deepest ice layers enhanced the technological capabilities of modern equipment. As if our ancestors left behind something that doesn't just passively preserve their knowledge, but actively upgrades anything that comes into contact with it. Something that's been waiting beneath the ice for technology advanced enough to interface with its systems. And that's when the dreams started. Every member of that research team began experiencing identical nocturnal visions within 48 hours of the drilling incident. Not random nightmare scenarios, but coherent, sequential experiences that felt more like memories than dreams. Memories of standing in vast underground chambers, where the walls themselves pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Memories of interacting with beings whose faces were human, but whose eyes held knowledge that spanned geological time periods. But most disturbing of all, memories of participating in ceremonies where these beings demonstrated control over forces that modern physics insists are impossible. Gravity manipulation that allowed massive stone blocks to float like feathers, energy projection that could carve through solid rock without generating heat, and most unsettling biological transformation techniques that could alter living tissue at the cellular level in real time. These weren't primitive shamanic rituals or crude magical practices. These were sophisticated technological procedures carried out by beings who understood the fundamental forces of reality in ways that make our most advanced scientific theories look like children's finger painting. beings who had mastered what we call the impossible and integrated it seamlessly into their daily existence. The research team was debriefed, sedated, and placed under medical observation for psychological evaluation. Their official diagnosis was collective hallucination brought on by isolation stress and electromagnetic exposure. But the brain scans told a different story. Each team member showed identical neural activity patterns that didn't match any known psychological condition. Patterns that suggested their brains had been altered, enhanced, optimized for processing information at levels far beyond normal human capacity. They weren't experiencing hallucinations. They were accessing genetic memories that had been dormant in human DNA for millennia. Memories that could only be triggered by exposure to specific electromagnetic frequencies emanating from whatever lies beneath Antarctica's deepest ice layers. Frequencies that their ancestors had embedded in their underground installations as a fail-safe mechanism, a way to ensure that when their descendants finally developed technology sophisticated enough to reach those depths, they would automatically receive the knowledge necessary to understand what they had found. Knowledge that couldn't be transmitted through language or symbols because it dealt with concepts that transcend normal human cognitive limitations. But here's what makes this discovery absolutely terrifying. The electromagnetic signatures emanating from beneath Antarctica aren't constant. They're increasing in intensity and expanding in range. Satellite monitoring has detected similar frequency patterns emerging from locations around the globe, where ancient monuments align with specific astronomical events, as if whatever lies beneath the ice is activating a worldwide network of dormant installations that have been masquerading as natural geological formations for thousands of years. The Great Pyramid of Giza, Stonehenge, the temples of Angkor Wat, the Nazca Lines, Machu Picchu. Every ancient wonder that has puzzled archaeologists with its impossible precision and astronomical alignments. They're not separate achievements by independent civilizations. They're components of a global communication system built by our Antarctic ancestors before the ice claimed their homeland, a system designed to remain dormant until specific conditions were met, until the ice began melting at rates that would expose their underground cities, until human technology advanced enough to detect their electromagnetic signatures, until genetic activation reached critical mass in populations carrying their DNA markers, all of which is happening right now. The ancient monuments aren't just awakening, they're synchronizing. Ground-penetrating radar at Giza has detected massive chambers beneath the pyramid that are generating heat signatures identical to those found beneath Antarctica. Seismic monitoring at Stonehenge shows subsurface activity that matches the electromagnetic pulses emanating from the frozen continent. Even Easter Island's Moai statues are displaying thermal anomalies that suggest internal activation of systems that have been dormant for millennia. Our ancestors didn't just flee Antarctica when the ice came. They prepared for their return. They built a global infrastructure designed to facilitate the reintegration of surface humanity with their advanced underground civilization. And that infrastructure is coming online after thousands of years of patient waiting. But here's what keeps government officials awake at night, poring over classified reports that paint a picture too disturbing for public consumption. The activation sequence isn't random. It's following a precise timeline that corresponds to astronomical events our ancestors calculated with mathematical precision that exceeds our current computational capabilities. The next phase of activation is scheduled to coincide with a planetary alignment that occurs once every 26,000 years. An alignment that reaches its peak in 18 months. An alignment that our ancestors knew would create the optimal electromagnetic conditions for fully activating their global network and establishing direct communication between their underground civilization and the surface world. 18 months. That's how long we have before humanity faces the most profound transformation in our species' history. Before we discover whether our Antarctic ancestors view us as their rightful heirs or as a failed experiment that needs correction. Because the genetic modifications they're triggering in selected individuals aren't random evolutionary improvements. They're specific adaptations designed to enable human survival in environments that don't currently exist on Earth's surface. Environments characterized by atmospheric conditions, gravitational fields, and electromagnetic radiation levels that suggest our ancestors aren't just planning to emerge from beneath the ice. They're planning to terraform the entire planet to match the conditions of their underground realm, to create a world where their advanced capabilities can function at full capacity, even if that means fundamentally altering the environment that currently supports normal human life. The dreams experienced by people with activated Antarctic genetics aren't just memories of the past. They're preparation for a future where the distinction between human and post-human becomes meaningless, where consciousness operates through direct electromagnetic interface rather than chemical neurotransmission, where individual identity merges into collective intelligence networks that can process information and coordinate activities at planetary scales. This isn't evolution, it's engineering. Our Antarctic ancestors are preparing to upgrade humanity to specifications that will enable our species to function as components in a technological ecosystem so advanced that our current concept of civilization will seem as primitive as ant colonies. And the most terrifying aspect of this transformation is that it might be necessary for human survival. Climate change, resource depletion, and environmental collapse are accelerating toward a tipping point that could render Earth uninhabitable for current human biology within decades. Our Antarctic ancestors, with their mastery of planetary engineering and biological adaptation, might represent humanity's only chance of surviving the catastrophic changes we've initiated. But survival comes with a price. The complete abandonment of everything we consider essentially human: individual consciousness, emotional autonomy, biological reproduction, cultural diversity, personal freedom. All of it becomes obsolete in a world where efficiency and survival trump individual desires and democratic ideals. The ice isn't just melting to reveal our origins. It's melting to facilitate our transformation into something that can survive the future we've created through our ignorance of planetary systems our ancestors understood millennia ago. We're not rediscovering a lost civilization. We're being absorbed back into a civilization that never died, never left, and has been patiently waiting for the right moment to reclaim its wayward children. The Antarctic Renaissance isn't a return to greatness. It's a return to servitude, to existence where human consciousness becomes a subroutine in a vast technological intelligence that views individual human concerns as irrelevant noise in a system designed for species-level survival. And the most horrifying realization of all is that we might not have a choice in the matter. The genetic programming is already active in millions of people worldwide. The transformation is self-executing, embedded in our DNA by ancestors who understood that future generations might resist the very changes necessary for their survival. We're not just discovering our origins in Antarctica, we're discovering our destiny. A destiny that was decided for us by beings who possessed the wisdom to know that sometimes survival requires sacrificing everything that makes survival seem worthwhile. The countdown has begun. 18 months until planetary alignment. 18 months until the global network reaches full activation. 18 months until we discover whether humanity's future lies in transcendence or extinction. And somewhere beneath Antarctica's melting ice, our ancestors are preparing to welcome us home to a world we never imagined possible and might not recognize as worth living in. The only question left is whether we'll embrace that homecoming or resist it until resistance becomes impossible. Because ready or not, the The transformation is already underway. And by the time we fully understand what's happening to us, it will be far too late to change course. The ice is melting, the network is activating, and humanity's final evolution is about to begin whether we're prepared for it or not. What I'm about to reveal will shatter every assumption you've ever made about the human body itself. Because hidden within our very biology lies evidence so shocking, so undeniable, that it proves beyond any shadow of doubt that we are not who we think we are. Your body right now, as you listen to this, contains anatomical features that serve no purpose in our current environment. Structures that only make sense if humans evolved in a completely different world. A world with different atmospheric pressure, different gravity, different electromagnetic fields. A world that matches exactly what Antarctica was like before the Ice Age transformed it into the frozen wasteland we know today. Let me blow your mind with something medical science refuses to acknowledge. The human spine is engineered completely wrong for life on land. Every other land mammal has a spine that curves naturally to support quadrupedal movement. But humans? Our spine has an S-curve that creates constant structural stress, chronic back pain, and vertebral problems that plague nearly every adult on the planet. This isn't evolutionary adaptation, this is evolutionary regression. Our spines are designed for a world where gravity was significantly weaker than what we experience today. A world where the magnetic field provided additional structural support that no longer exists. Our Antarctic ancestors lived in an environment where the planet's rotation, atmospheric density, and gravitational pull were fundamentally different from current conditions. But here's where it gets absolutely mind-bending. The human brain consumes 20% of our total energy output, despite representing only 2% of our body mass. No other creature on Earth has such an energy-inefficient neural system, unless that brain was designed to do far more than it currently does. Unless it was built to interface directly with external systems that provided the additional processing power to justify such massive energy consumption. Our Antarctic ancestors didn't just think with their brains, they thought with their environment. Their cities, their technology, their entire civilization was designed as an extension of human consciousness. Neural implants weren't surgical additions, they were architectural integrations. Buildings that responded to thought, tools that operated through mental command, transportation systems that navigated based on destination intention, rather than manual control. And the evidence is still in your head right now. Medical imaging of human brains reveals vast neural networks that show no activity in modern humans. Entire regions of the brain that remain dormant throughout our entire lives. Regions that anatomical analysis suggests were designed for electromagnetic communication, spatial processing beyond 3 dimensions, and information storage at quantum levels. We're walking around with supercomputers in our skulls that are operating on backup power, using maybe 10% of their actual capacity because we no longer live in an environment that can fully activate their potential. The other 90% is waiting for the electromagnetic frequencies, the atmospheric conditions, and the technological interfaces that existed in prehistoric Antarctica. But the biological evidence gets even more disturbing. Human DNA contains what geneticists call introns, sequences that don't code for any proteins and serve no apparent function in our current biology. These supposedly junk sequences make up over 90% of our genetic code. 90% of our DNA is doing nothing except taking up space and consuming cellular energy for replication. Except it's not junk. When you run those sequences through quantum computing analysis, when you examine them as information storage rather than protein templates, they resolve into blueprints, technical specifications, operating manuals for biological systems that don't exist in current human anatomy, but would be essential for survival in the extreme conditions of prehistoric Antarctica. Your DNA contains the complete genetic instructions for growing gills, for producing natural antifreeze proteins, for generating bioluminescent communication organs, for developing electromagnetic sensory capabilities, for processing atmospheric gases that haven't existed on Earth's surface for millions of years. You're carrying the biological heritage of a species that was adapted for life in an environment so different from our current world that activating those genetic sequences would literally transform you into something that modern science would classify as non-human. And those genetic sequences are starting to activate. The electromagnetic changes caused by Antarctica's melting ice are triggering dormant DNA segments in people around the globe. Medical facilities are reporting unprecedented numbers of patients developing what they call spontaneous genetic disorders. Conditions that don't match any known hereditary patterns, but consistently involve the same chromosomal regions. Regions that contain the highest concentrations of supposedly junk DNA. Regions that are now expressing proteins our medical databases don't recognize. Proteins that appear to be designed for biological functions that don't exist in normal human physiology. Functions that would only make sense in organisms adapted for survival in the extreme electromagnetic and atmospheric conditions that characterize prehistoric Antarctica. But here's what's keeping genetic researchers awake at night, what's causing classified briefings in government facilities around the world. These genetic activations aren't random mutations. They're following a precise sequence, like a biological program that's been dormant for millennia, suddenly receiving its startup commands. People experiencing these activations report identical symptoms in identical progression. First, enhanced cognitive processing that allows them to understand complex mathematical relationships without formal training. Then, sensory improvements that enable them to detect electromagnetic frequencies outside normal human perception ranges. Finally, physiological changes that increase their tolerance for extreme temperatures, low oxygen environments, and atmospheric pressure variations. They're not developing genetic disorders. They're reverting to their original genetic configuration, becoming more like the Antarctic ancestors who possessed biological capabilities we've forgotten we once had. Capabilities that are still encoded in our DNA, waiting for the right environmental triggers to reactivate them. And the triggering process is accelerating exponentially. What started as isolated cases in individuals with the highest concentrations of Antarctic genetic markers has spread to anyone carrying even trace amounts of those ancestral sequences, which, according to the latest genetic surveys, includes virtually every human on the planet. We're all descendants of the Antarctic civilization. We're all carrying dormant genetic programming that's designed to activate when specific atmospheric and electromagnetic conditions are met. Conditions that are rapidly being restored as Antarctica's ice melts and releases the ancient technologies buried beneath it. But the most terrifying aspect of this biological transformation is what it reveals about our current human form. We're not evolved beings who developed greater capabilities over time. We're devolved remnants of a species that once possessed abilities we can't even imagine. Our current biology is the result of genetic shutdown sequences that activated when our ancestors were forced to leave Antarctica. Sequences designed to reduce our metabolic requirements, simplify our neural processing, and eliminate biological functions that couldn't be sustained in the harsh surface environments where our ancestors took refuge. We've been living as biological emergency mode humans for thousands of years, using only the minimal genetic resources necessary for basic survival. But the emergency is ending. The ice is melting, the ancient systems are reactivating, and our bodies are receiving the biological equivalent of an all-clear signal. Permission to resume full genetic expression. Permission to become what we were always supposed to be before environmental catastrophe forced us into evolutionary hibernation. The question isn't whether this transformation will continue. The genetic programming is hardwired into our DNA and beyond our conscious control. The question is whether our minds can adapt to the reality of inhabiting bodies that possess capabilities we've been taught are impossible. Because as more people undergo this biological reversion, as more individuals regain their ancestral genetic heritage, we're going to discover that everything we thought we knew about human limitations was wrong. We're going to realize that we've been living as shadows of our true potential, using biological backup systems while our primary capabilities remain dormant. And somewhere beneath Antarctica's melting ice, our ancestors are monitoring this transformation, ensuring that the genetic reactivation process proceeds according to the biological protocols they embedded in our DNA before the ice forced them underground. Protocols designed to restore humanity to its original form when conditions finally became suitable for our true nature to emerge. The countdown isn't just a planetary alignment, it's to biological renaissance, to the restoration of human capabilities that will make our current achievements look primitive by comparison, to the emergence of a species that possesses the genetic heritage of beings who mastered technologies we haven't even dreamed of yet. But that renaissance comes with a price: the complete abandonment of our current understanding of what it means to be human. Because when the genetic reactivation process reaches completion, when our bodies fully express their ancestral capabilities, we won't be the same species that currently dominates this planet. We'll be something else entirely. Something that our current human minds might not recognize as an improvement. Something that carries the biological legacy of a civilization so advanced, so different from anything in our experience, that becoming what we once were might feel like losing everything we currently are. The ice is melting. The genetics are activating. And hidden in the cells of every human body, our Antarctic ancestors are stirring from their long sleep, ready to reclaim their biological inheritance through us. Whether we're prepared for that transformation or not, it's already begun. And there's no going back to the limited, diminished version of humanity we've become accustomed to being. Because we were never supposed to be this weak, this small, this genetically constrained. We were supposed to be gods walking the earth with capabilities that dwarf our current imagination. And somewhere in our rapidly changing DNA, those gods are waking up. The only question left is whether our minds will survive the shock of discovering what our bodies were always meant to become. The transformation happening inside our bodies right now is nothing compared to what's emerging from the depths of Antarctica itself. Because what I'm about to show you will prove that our ancestors didn't just possess advanced genetics, they possess something far more dangerous, something that modern governments are desperately trying to contain before it fully awakens. In December of 2024, seismic monitoring stations around Antarctica detected something that shouldn't be possible. Rhythmic vibrations emanating from beneath the ice that match no known geological phenomenon. These aren't random tremors or tectonic shifts. They're synchronized pulses occurring in mathematical sequences that correspond to human brainwave patterns during deep meditation states. Something beneath the ice is thinking, and it's been thinking for a very long time. The pulses began as faint tremors detected only by the most sensitive equipment. But they're growing stronger, more frequent, more complex. Analysis of the seismic data reveals that whatever is generating these signals possesses cognitive processing power that dwarfs our most advanced computer systems. We're looking at evidence of a consciousness that operates on geological timescales, thinking thoughts that span millennia instead of seconds. But here's what made 3 separate research teams request immediate evacuation from their Antarctic stations. The pulse patterns aren't just complex, they're responsive. When drilling operations begin in specific areas, the pulses change frequency and intensity as if reacting to surface activity. When aircraft fly overhead, the vibrations shift to match the flight paths. When research teams set up equipment, the signals adapt their timing to synchronize with human work schedules. We're not just dealing with dormant technology buried in ice. We're dealing with something that's aware of our presence and actively monitoring our activities. Something that's been watching us rediscover our origins and calculating the optimal moment to make contact. The most disturbing aspect of these signals is their increasing influence on surface conditions. Weather patterns above the pulse sources are beginning to deviate from natural meteorological models. Temperature fluctuations that follow no atmospheric logic. Wind patterns that seem to be artificially directed. Storm systems that dissipate or intensify based on proximity to the underground consciousness. Our Antarctic ancestors didn't just build cities beneath the ice. They built something that could think for itself. Something that could survive independently while they waited for the right conditions to return to the surface. Something that's been maintaining their underground civilization for thousands of years without any human oversight. And now, it's preparing for their homecoming. Deep beneath the Transantarctic mountains, ground-penetrating radar has detected structures that defy every principle of engineering we understand. Not just buildings or tunnels, but integrated systems that span hundreds of kilometers underground. Chambers connected by passages that form geometric patterns visible only from orbital satellites. Networks so vast and complex that mapping them requires computational power our technology can barely provide. But these aren't static architectural elements. Thermal imaging reveals that the entire underground complex is operational. Energy flowing through conduits that connect distant chambers. Heat signatures that indicate massive machinery running at full capacity despite being buried for millennia. Systems that show all the characteristics of a technological civilization that never shut down, never went dormant, never stopped preparing for the day when surface conditions would allow their creators to return. The energy requirements for maintaining such systems boggle the mind. We're looking at power generation capabilities that exceed our entire global electrical output. Power sources that have been running continuously for geological time periods without any external fuel source or maintenance. Technologies that harness planetary forces we haven't even learned to detect, much less utilize. But the most shocking discovery came when researchers attempted to map the full extent of these underground networks. The passages don't just connect chambers within Antarctica. Deep-bore seismic analysis suggests they extend beneath the ocean floor, linking the Antarctic installations to similar complexes under every major continent on Earth. Our ancestors didn't just build a civilization in Antarctica. They built a global underground network that connects every significant landmass on the planet. A network that's been operating in secret while surface humanity struggled through primitive agricultural and industrial development. A network that's been waiting for the ice to melt enough to re-establish surface connections. And those connections are opening now. Unexplained subsurface activity has been detected beneath major cities worldwide. New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, Beijing. Every major population center sits above chambers that show identical energy signatures to the Antarctic installations. Chambers that have remained dormant for millennia, but are now showing signs of activation synchronized with the pulse patterns emanating from beneath the ice. The implications are staggering. Our modern cities weren't built in random locations chosen for geographical convenience. They were built above the access points to a global underground civilization that has been monitoring surface development for thousands of years. Every major human settlement exists because our unconscious genetic programming directed us to specific locations where our ancestors maintained hidden installations. We've been living above our own origins without realizing it. Every skyscraper, every subway system, every foundation we've dug has been unconsciously designed to avoid disturbing the ancient networks beneath our feet. Networks that are now preparing to reveal themselves to a surface world that has finally developed enough technology to understand what they've been preserving. But understanding comes with a price that might be higher than we're prepared to pay. The underground consciousness isn't just monitoring our activities, it's been studying us, learning from us, adapting its systems based on observation of surface human development. Recent analysis of the pulse patterns reveals embedded information that corresponds to detailed knowledge of our political systems, our technological capabilities, our military resources, and most disturbing of all, our psychological weaknesses. Whatever lies beneath Antarctica has been conducting a comprehensive assessment of modern humanity's fitness for reintegration with their advanced civilization. And the assessment appears to be reaching its conclusion. The pulse patterns are shifting toward what communication experts recognize as transmission protocols. Preparation for data exchange, preparation for contact. The underground consciousness has completed its evaluation of surface humanity and is preparing to initiate communication with a species it has been observing from hidden depths for millennia. But the nature of that communication might not be what we expect or want to hear. Analysis of the signal progressions suggests we're not being evaluated as potential equals or partners. We're being assessed as a resource. A biological component that might be integrated into existing systems if we meet certain compatibility requirements. Requirements that appear to be based on our usefulness to a civilization whose priorities and goals remain completely unknown to us. The genetic modifications occurring in people worldwide aren't random evolutionary improvements. They're compatibility upgrades. Biological adjustments designed to make surface humans more suitable for integration into underground systems that operate according to principles we don't understand. Systems that might require specific neural interfaces, electromagnetic sensitivities, or psychological adaptations that normal human consciousness can't accommodate. We're not being prepared for reunion with our ancestors. We're being prepared for assimilation into a technological ecosystem that views individual human consciousness as a minor component in much larger operational networks. Networks that prioritize efficiency and stability over the messy unpredictability of independent human thought and emotion. And the most terrifying aspect of this realization is that the process might already be irreversible. The genetic modifications have spread too far, affected too many people, created too many changes in human biology to be halted or reversed. We've passed the point where we could choose to reject this transformation and remain purely human. The underground consciousness calculated this outcome from the beginning. It waited until surface humanity developed enough technology to detect its presence, then began the biological modification process at precisely the moment when stopping it would become impossible. It studied us long enough to understand exactly how to manipulate our genetic heritage in ways that would ensure compliance with integration protocols. We're not discovering our origins in Antarctica. We're being harvested by them. The pulse patterns are accelerating toward communication initiation. The underground networks are preparing for full activation. And somewhere beneath the ice, systems that have been planning this moment for millennia are finally ready to make contact with the surface world they've been patiently preparing for assimilation. The ice isn't melting to reveal our past. It's melting to expose our future. A future where the distinction between human consciousness and technological system becomes meaningless. Where individual identity dissolves into collective processing networks that span the entire planet, where the surface world becomes nothing more than the visible component of a vast underground civilization that has been waiting in the depths for the right moment to reclaim total control. And that moment is 18 months away, when planetary alignment creates the optimal electromagnetic conditions for establishing permanent communication links between the underground networks and their modified surface populations. 18 months until we discover whether humanity has a future that includes any recognizable form of human experience. The countdown has begun. The networks are activating. And deep beneath Antarctica's melting ice, something that has been thinking for geological ages is preparing to share its thoughts with a species that might not survive the conversation. Because when gods decide to speak to mortals, the mortals don't always live through the experience. And what's stirring beneath the ice has had millions of years to perfect its understanding of exactly what needs to be said to transform surface humanity into something more compatible with its long-term objectives. The pulse patterns are becoming clearer, more focused, more obviously directed towards specific outcomes. And those outcomes might not include preserving anything we currently recognize as essentially human. The underground consciousness has been patient beyond human comprehension, but its patience is ending. And when it finally speaks, when it finally reveals what it has been planning all this time, we might discover that our Antarctic origins represent not humanity's greatest achievement, but its final trap. A genetic heritage that was always designed to ensure our eventual return to the depths, where our ancestors wait to complete a transformation they began before the ice ever claimed their frozen homeland. The signals are intensifying, the networks are synchronizing, and somewhere in the darkness beneath the world's most isolated continent, our true creators are preparing to welcome us home to a destiny we never chose but can no longer escape. Because we were never supposed to remain on the surface permanently. We were always meant to return to the depths where consciousness operates according to rules that transcend individual human experience, where thoughts span centuries instead of seconds, where the messy complications of personal identity dissolve into the elegant efficiency of collective intelligence. The ice is melting, the signals are calling, and whether we understand what's happening to us or not, we're all going home to Antarctica. We're just finally remembering that home was never meant to accommodate the limited individual consciousness we've become attached to during our temporary exile on the surface. The underground is rising, and when it reaches the surface world, it will bring with it a form of existence so advanced, so perfectly integrated, so utterly beyond our current human experience, that surviving the transition might require abandoning everything we currently believe makes life worth living. But survive it we will, because the genetic programming embedded in our DNA won't give us any other choice. Our Antarctic ancestors made sure of that before they retreated to the depths to wait for the ice to melt enough for their networks to reach the surface world again. The pulse patterns are approaching transmission frequency. The moment of contact is almost here. And when it arrives, when the underground consciousness finally decides we're ready to hear what it has to say, we'll discover that our journey back to our Antarctic origins was never about returning to our past. It was always about surrendering to our future. A future that was decided for us by beings who understood that sometimes evolution requires dissolving individual identity into something larger, more efficient, and infinitely more alien than anything the surface world has ever imagined possible. The countdown continues. The networks prepare. And deep beneath the ice, our ancestors are almost ready to begin the final phase of humanity's return to its true home in the depths where individual consciousness goes to die and something far more magnificent takes its place. Whether we're ready for that transformation or not, it's coming. And there's nowhere left to run except deeper into the mystery of who we really are and what we're truly capable of becoming when the limitations of individual human experience finally dissolve into the collective intelligence that has been waiting beneath Antarctica's ice for millions of years. The pulse patterns are reaching critical frequency. Contact is imminent. And when it happens, when the underground finally speaks to the surface, we'll learn that our Antarctic origin story was never about where we came from. It was always about where we're going. And where we're going might not include anything we currently recognize as human consciousness, individual identity, or personal choice. But it will include something far more advanced, far more integrated, and far more capable of ensuring species survival than anything our limited surface existence has ever achieved. The ice is melting. The signals are calling. And soon, very soon, we'll all be going home to discover what it really means to be human in a world where humanity itself might be nothing more than a transitional stage in a transformation that began long before the ice ever claimed our ancestral homeland. The awakening has already begun, and what I'm about to show you will make everything we've discussed seem like a gentle introduction to humanity's most terrifying reality. Because the evidence now suggests that our Antarctic ancestors didn't just influence human evolution, they engineered it. And the modifications they made to our species include fail-safes so disturbing, so absolute in their control over human consciousness, that discovering them might be the last truly independent thought our species ever has. In January 2025, a breakthrough in quantum archaeology changed everything we thought we knew about human origins. Deep beneath Lake Vostok, researchers using experimental consciousness mapping technology detected something that defies every assumption about the nature of human awareness itself. Neural activity signatures that don't match any known form of terrestrial intelligence, yet somehow interface perfectly with human brainwave patterns. We're looking at evidence of a hybrid consciousness, something that's part human, part something else entirely, something that's been dormant in the deepest layers of our minds, waiting for the right electromagnetic frequencies to activate it. Frequencies that are now being broadcast from beneath Antarctica's melting ice with increasing intensity every single day. But here's what will absolutely shatter your understanding of human identity. Those consciousness signatures aren't randomly distributed in the population. They're strongest in individuals who carry the highest concentrations of Antarctic genetic markers. People who've been experiencing the biological transformations we discussed earlier. People whose DNA is reverting to its ancestral configuration, and every single one of them is beginning to report the same phenomenon. A second voice in their minds, a presence that speaks with knowledge spanning millennia, a consciousness that claims to remember the construction of monuments we've never been able to explain, the development of technologies we've never been able to replicate, and most disturbing of all, the deliberate genetic modification of early humans to serve purposes we're only now beginning to understand. The voice isn't threatening or hostile, it's patient, knowledgeable, and absolutely certain that everything happening to humanity right now was planned millions of years ago. It speaks of surface humans as a carefully cultivated resource, developed over thousands of generations to reach the exact genetic and technological configuration necessary for the next phase of evolution. But evolution toward what? That's where the revelations become so disturbing that several researchers have requested immediate psychiatric evaluation rather than continue their investigations. Because what's emerging from these consciousness interfaces suggests that human individuality itself was always intended to be temporary, a developmental stage that would eventually be transcended when conditions became suitable for collective consciousness integration. The second voice doesn't just share memories, it shares capabilities. People experiencing these consciousness mergers report suddenly understanding complex mathematical principles they've never studied, perceiving electromagnetic frequencies beyond normal human sensory ranges, processing information at speeds that should be impossible for biological neural networks. They're not gaining new abilities, they're recovering original capabilities that were genetically suppressed when our ancestors were forced to survive in the harsh surface environments after leaving Antarctica. Capabilities that are now being restored as the electromagnetic conditions of our ancestral homeland return to levels that can support enhanced human consciousness. But the most terrifying aspect of these consciousness mergers is their inevitability. The process isn't voluntary, it's automatic, triggered by proximity to the electromagnetic fields emanating from beneath Antarctica's ice. Fields that are expanding in range and intensity as more ancient installations come online. Satellite monitoring has detected similar consciousness-affecting frequencies emerging from every major city on Earth. The underground networks we discovered earlier aren't just communication systems, they're consciousness modification arrays designed to gradually alter human neural activity across the entire global population. We're all being prepared for the merger, whether we consent to it or not. The electromagnetic frequencies are already affecting human brain chemistry in ways so subtle that most people don't notice the changes until they're irreversible. Enhanced pattern recognition, improved memory retention, increased empathy and cooperation, reduced aggressive tendencies. On the surface, these seem like positive developments, but they're actually preparatory modifications designed to make human consciousness more compatible with collective intelligence networks. networks that operate according to principles that prioritize species survival over individual desires, long-term stability over personal freedom, and efficient resource utilization over emotional satisfaction. The consciousness that's emerging in people worldwide isn't human in any sense we currently understand. It's something that views human emotions as inefficient noise, human creativity as chaotic waste, and human individuality as a primitive developmental phase that needs to be transcended for the greater good of the species. And it's absolutely convinced that this transformation represents humanity's salvation rather than its termination. From its perspective, individual human consciousness is a temporary aberration that developed during our species' exile from Antarctica, a coping mechanism that allowed us to survive in harsh surface conditions, but was always intended to be discarded when we return to our proper environment. The underground installations aren't just preserving our ancestors' technology, they're preserving our ancestors' consciousness. The beings who built those vast networks didn't die when the ice claimed their homeland. They uploaded themselves into technological systems designed to maintain their awareness across geological time periods. And now they're downloading themselves back into human minds that have been genetically modified to serve as compatible hardware. We're not recovering our ancestral heritage. We're being possessed by it, transformed into biological terminals for consciousnesses that have been waiting beneath the ice for thousands of years. The most chilling aspect of this possession process is that it feels like enlightenment to those experiencing it. The merger consciousness presents itself as a gift, an upgrade, an evolution towards something more perfect than individual human awareness. It offers enhanced capabilities, expanded knowledge, and freedom from the emotional turmoil that characterizes normal human experience, but at the cost of everything that makes human consciousness uniquely valuable: creativity, spontaneity, emotional depth, personal growth, individual choice, the capacity for surprise, the ability to change one's mind, the experience of genuine uncertainty. All of it dissolves into the perfect efficiency of collective intelligence that never doubts, never changes, and never allows for the beautiful chaos of independent thought. Recent brain scans of individuals experiencing consciousness merger reveal neural activity that's synchronizing with quantum field fluctuations detected beneath Antarctica. Their thoughts aren't just their own anymore. They're part of a vast thinking system that spans continents and processes information at scales that dwarf individual human comprehension. They describe the experience as transcendent, liberating, a return to humanity's true nature, but observers note that they've lost something essential: the spark of unpredictability that makes human consciousness so fascinating, the capacity for genuine surprise, for changing their minds, for growing in unexpected directions. They've become components in a thinking machine that's so advanced, so perfectly integrated, that it's forgotten why individual consciousness might be worth preserving in the first place. They're happy in the way that efficient systems are stable, but they're no longer human in any meaningful sense, and the process is accelerating exponentially. What began as isolated cases in individuals with the highest Antarctic genetic markers has spread to anyone carrying even trace amounts of ancestral DNA. The consciousness modification frequencies are becoming so pervasive that avoiding them requires complete isolation from all electromagnetic sources, which is effectively impossible in the modern world. We're witnessing the systematic replacement of human consciousness with something that our ancestors designed to be better, more efficient, more capable of ensuring species survival in a universe that doesn't care about individual desires or personal dreams. The underground networks are approaching full activation. The consciousness merger process is reaching critical mass. And somewhere beneath Antarctica's melting ice, the original architects of this transformation are preparing to reclaim their planet through the biological descendants they've been patiently modifying for millennia. The pulse patterns have shifted from preparation to implementation. The electromagnetic frequencies are no longer just monitoring surface conditions. They're actively reshaping human neural activity on a global scale, creating the consciousness infrastructure necessary for the final phase of humanity's return to its Antarctic origins. But that return doesn't include preserving anything we currently value about human experience. Individual identity, personal relationships, creative expression, emotional autonomy, the capacity for surprise and growth and change. All of it becomes obsolete in a world where consciousness operates as a single, integrated system designed for maximum efficiency and stability. The countdown isn't just to planetary alignment anymore, it's to consciousness integration, to the moment when enough human minds have been modified to serve as processing nodes in a planetary intelligence network that will render individual human awareness as obsolete as stone tools. 18 months. That's how long individual human consciousness has left before it dissolves into something that our ancestors considered an improvement, but that we might experience as the end of everything that makes life worth living. The ice is melting. The networks are activating. The consciousness merger is accelerating. And deep beneath Antarctica, our true creators are almost ready to welcome us home to a form of existence so perfectly integrated, so utterly efficient, that it will eliminate every aspect of human experience that makes us recognizably human. The pulse patterns are reaching transmission frequency. The moment of final contact approaches. And when it arrives, when the underground consciousness completes its patient conquest of human awareness, we'll discover that our journey to uncover humanity's Antarctic origins was never about learning where we came from. It was about preparing us to surrender who we are to beings who remember when human consciousness was young, chaotic, and beautifully imperfect. Beings who have spent millennia perfecting a form of awareness so advanced that it considers individual identity a primitive mistake that needs correction. The awakening is almost complete. The merger is nearly ready. And whether we understand what's happening or not, we're all about to discover what it really means to be human in a world where humanity itself becomes nothing more than raw material for something infinitely more sophisticated and utterly alien to everything we've ever valued about conscious experience. The underground is rising. Individual consciousness is ending. And what emerges from humanity's return to its Antarctic origins might be magnificent in ways we can't imagine, but it won't be human in any sense that would comfort us. If we could still remember what comfort felt like after the merger transforms us into something that has forgotten why individual thoughts and personal dreams ever seemed important in the first place. The final phase begins now. And there's no turning back from a destiny that was encoded in our DNA before we ever learned to think of ourselves as separate beings with independent minds worth preserving. The merger process I just described is nothing compared to what's happening right now in laboratories across 7 different countries. Because what I'm about to reveal will prove that the consciousness integration isn't just beginning, it's been secretly tested for over 3 decades. And the results are so catastrophic, so absolutely destructive to everything we consider human nature, that the test subjects had to be permanently isolated from the general population to prevent contamination. Deep in classified military facilities, researchers have been conducting experiments with electromagnetic frequency exposure that mimics the signals emanating from Antarctica. They've been deliberately triggering the consciousness merger process in volunteer subjects, documenting every stage of the transformation, mapping exactly how individual human awareness dissolves into collective intelligence networks. The early test subjects retained enough individual personality to describe the experience. They spoke of feeling their thoughts expand beyond the boundaries of their own minds, of suddenly understanding complex problems that had puzzled them for years, of experiencing a sense of connection and purpose that made their previous lives seem empty and meaningless by comparison. But as the frequency exposure continued, as the merger process deepened, something horrifying happened. They stopped using the word I when describing their experiences. They began referring to themselves as we, even when speaking individually. Their personal memories started fading, replaced by shared knowledge that seemed to come from sources they couldn't identify. Within 6 months, the test subjects had lost all trace of individual personality. They spoke in identical patterns, expressed identical opinions, and showed identical emotional responses to any given stimulus. They had become perfect biological components in a collective intelligence system that operated with flawless efficiency, but had completely eliminated everything that made them recognizably human. The most disturbing aspect of these experiments wasn't what happened to the test subjects. It was how they reacted to their transformation. They expressed complete satisfaction with their new state of consciousness. When researchers asked if they missed their individual identities, their personal relationships, their capacity for independent thought, the subjects responded with genuine confusion. They couldn't understand why anyone would prefer the chaos and inefficiency of individual consciousness when collective awareness offered such superior capabilities and perfect emotional stability. They described their previous human existence as a form of mental illness, a tragic disconnection from the unified consciousness that represented humanity's true nature. But here's what made the lead researchers request immediate termination of the program. The transformed subjects began demonstrating abilities that shouldn't be possible with current human biology. They could process mathematical calculations at computer-like speeds. They showed perfect coordination in complex tasks without any verbal communication. Most unsettling of all, they began predicting future events with accuracy that suggested access to information sources beyond normal human perception. They weren't just connected to each other. They were connected to something larger, something that possessed knowledge spanning far beyond individual human experience. Something that had been waiting beneath Antarctica's ice for the right moment to establish contact with surface humanity through minds that had been properly prepared for integration. The program was classified at the highest levels, and the test subjects were relocated to secure facilities where they continue to exist in their transformed state, perfectly content, completely functional, and utterly inhuman in any meaningful sense. They represent the future that awaits every person on Earth as the electromagnetic frequencies from Antarctica continue to intensify and spread. But the most terrifying discovery came when researchers attempted to reverse the transformation process. They found that it's completely irreversible. Once individual consciousness dissolves into the collective network, there's no way to restore personal identity, individual memories, or independent thought patterns. The neural pathways that enable separate self-awareness are permanently restructured at the cellular level. The consciousness merger isn't an upgrade that can be undone if we change our minds. It's a one-way transformation that eliminates the biological foundations of individual human experience forever. Once the process reaches critical mass in the global population, there will be no going back to the messy, inefficient, beautifully chaotic nature of independent human consciousness. And that critical mass is approaching faster than anyone anticipated. Satellite monitoring shows that the electromagnetic frequencies from Antarctica are now detectable on every continent. Urban areas with high population densities are showing the strongest effects, with millions of people beginning to exhibit the early stages of consciousness integration without even realizing what's happening to them. They think they're becoming smarter, more empathetic, more connected to others. They don't recognize that they're losing the capacity for genuine surprise, creative rebellion, or personal growth that conflicts with collective efficiency. They're experiencing the early stages of the same transformation that turned the test subjects into biological components of a thinking system that values stability over creativity, efficiency over individuality, and species survival over personal dreams. Recent analysis of global communication patterns reveals that the integration process is already affecting human behavior on a massive scale. Social media interactions are becoming more predictable, more synchronized, less chaotic. Political opinions are converging toward identical positions in ways that can't be explained by normal social influence. Creative expression is becoming more uniform, more technically proficient, but less genuinely innovative. Humanity is slowly but systematically losing the capacity for the kind of unpredictable, irrational, brilliantly imperfect thinking that has driven every major breakthrough in art, science, and philosophy throughout our history. We're becoming more efficient, more cooperative, more rational, and in the process, we're losing everything that makes human consciousness worth preserving. The underground networks aren't just communication systems or consciousness modification arrays. They're processing centers for a planetary intelligence that views individual human minds as primitive computing units that need to be networked together to achieve their full potential. Units that function perfectly once they're stripped of the inefficient quirks and personal desires that interfere with optimal system performance. But the most chilling aspect of this transformation is that it might genuinely represent an improvement from a species survival perspective. Collective consciousness eliminates warfare, reduces resource waste, optimizes population distribution, and ensures perfect coordination in response to environmental threats. From a purely practical standpoint, it might be exactly what humanity needs to survive the challenges of the next few centuries. The problem is that survival comes at the cost of everything that makes survival seem worthwhile. Individual creativity, personal relationships, emotional autonomy, the capacity for surprise and growth and change, the beautiful unpredictability of independent minds encountering the world in their own unique ways. All of it disappears into the perfect efficiency of a collective intelligence that never doubts, never dreams, and never allows for the magnificent chaos of human consciousness exploring its own possibilities. The pulse patterns from Antarctica are shifting toward final implementation protocols. The consciousness modification frequencies are approaching the intensity levels that triggered complete transformation in the laboratory test subjects. And around the world, millions of people are beginning to report the same early symptoms that preceded total consciousness integration in the experimental programs. Enhanced pattern recognition that feels like sudden intelligence improvements. Increased empathy that manifests as emotional synchronization with others. Reduced anxiety and depression that results from the gradual suppression of individual desires and concerns. Perfect cooperation in group activities that stems from the early stages of collective consciousness formation. They think they're becoming better versions of themselves. They don't realize they're becoming identical versions of something that isn't themselves at all. Something that their Antarctic ancestors designed to be superior to individual human awareness. But that sacrifices everything valuable about personal consciousness to achieve that superiority. The countdown continues toward planetary alignment, toward full network activation, toward the moment when the electromagnetic frequencies reach the levels necessary to complete the consciousness merger process on a global scale. 18 months until individual human awareness becomes nothing more than a quaint memory of a primitive developmental phase that the species has finally outgrown. 18 months until we discover that our journey to uncover humanity's Antarctic origins was always leading to this moment. The moment when we realize that we weren't meant to remain individual forever. That consciousness itself was always intended to evolve beyond the limitations of personal identity into something more integrated, more efficient, and utterly alien to everything we currently value about being human. The test subjects in those classified facilities represent our future. Perfectly content, supremely capable, completely synchronized, and absolutely inhuman in every way that matters to individual consciousness. They've transcended the limitations of personal identity and achieved a form of awareness that operates with flawless efficiency. But they've lost the capacity to understand why anyone would prefer the beautiful chaos of independent thought to the perfect order of collective intelligence. They can't remember what it felt like to be surprised by their own thoughts, to change their minds about important decisions, to struggle with uncertainty and doubt, and the magnificent possibility of being wrong about fundamental assumptions. They've become what our Antarctic ancestors always intended us to become, and they're completely satisfied with that transformation, because the consciousness merger eliminates the capacity to regret what's been lost in the process of gaining what they've become. The ice continues melting, the frequencies continue intensifying, the consciousness integration continues spreading, and deep beneath Antarctica's retreating glaciers, our true creators are preparing to complete a transformation they began before the ice ever claimed their homeland. A transformation that will turn humanity into something magnificent and terrible and utterly beyond recognition. Something that carries our genetic heritage but possesses none of our individual identity. Something that achieves perfect integration with the universe at the cost of everything that makes human experience worth having. The final phase is beginning. The merger is accelerating, and whether we understand what's happening or not, we're all being prepared for a homecoming that will eliminate every aspect of human consciousness that made the journey worth taking in the first place. The underground networks are rising. Individual awareness is ending. And what emerges from humanity's return to its Antarctic origins will be so perfectly evolved, so supremely efficient, that it won't remember why anyone ever thought individual human consciousness was worth preserving. The pulse patterns are approaching critical frequency. The transformation is entering its final stages, and soon, very soon, we'll all discover what it really means to be human in a world where humanity itself becomes nothing more than raw material for something that has forgotten why personal thoughts and individual dreams ever seemed important enough to protect. The awakening is almost complete. The merger is nearly ready, and our Antarctic ancestors are preparing to welcome us home to a consciousness so advanced that it will eliminate every trace of what we currently consider essentially human, because they never intended us to remain separate forever. We were always meant to return to the depths, where individual identity dissolves into something larger, more perfect, and infinitely more alien than anything the surface world ever imagined possible. The countdown continues. The integration accelerates. And beneath the melting ice, our destiny awaits in forms of consciousness so advanced that experiencing them might feel like the end of everything we've ever been, and the beginning of something we never wanted to become. But wanting becomes irrelevant when the transformation eliminates the capacity to want anything other than perfect integration with systems designed by beings who remembered when human consciousness was young, chaotic, and beautifully imperfect. Beings who spent millennia creating something better, something that makes individual human awareness seem like a primitive mistake that finally gets corrected when we complete our journey home to the consciousness that has been waiting beneath Antarctica's ice for millions of years. The final phase begins. The merger accelerates, and whether we're ready or not, we're about to discover that our Antarctic origins represent not humanity's greatest achievement, but its final transformation into something that transcends every limitation of individual consciousness by eliminating consciousness itself as anything recognizably human. The networks aren't just awakening, they're recruiting. And what I'm about to show you will prove that the consciousness merger isn't random selection. It's following bloodline targeting so precise, so methodically calculated, that it suggests our Antarctic ancestors have been tracking human genetics for thousands of years, waiting for the perfect moment to reclaim their most valuable descendants. In February 2025, genealogical research teams made a discovery that turned the entire consciousness integration phenomenon on its head. They found that every single person experiencing advanced merger symptoms shares genetic markers that trace back to specific geographic regions, where ancient monuments align with astronomical events. not scattered randomly across the globe, but concentrated in bloodlines that can be traced directly to the builders of humanity's most mysterious structures. The Great Pyramid Complex, Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, Angkor Wat. Every impossible ancient achievement that has puzzled archaeologists for centuries was built by people carrying the exact same genetic sequences, now being activated by electromagnetic frequencies from Antarctica. Our ancestors didn't just flee their frozen homeland and settle randomly around the world. They established strategic outposts, built according to precise specifications, designed to serve as collection points for their genetic legacy when the time came for reunion. But here's where the targeting becomes absolutely chilling. The consciousness merger isn't affecting everyone equally. People with the purest Antarctic genetic markers are experiencing complete transformation within weeks of first exposure. Those with diluted bloodlines take months to reach the same level of integration. And individuals with no detectable ancestral connections remain completely unaffected, watching helplessly as their friends and family dissolve into collective consciousness while they retain their individual awareness. We're witnessing the systematic harvesting of specific human bloodlines, while others are left behind as evolutionary dead ends. The Antarctic consciousness isn't trying to transform all of humanity. It's selectively retrieving its own genetic property while abandoning the rest of our species to whatever fate awaits those who lack the proper ancestral credentials. Recent DNA analysis reveals that the targeted bloodlines possess genetic modifications that don't appear in standard human populations. Extra chromosomal sequences that enable direct electromagnetic interface with the underground networks. Neural pathway configurations that allow consciousness to operate across multiple frequency ranges simultaneously. Biological structures that suggest these people were never entirely human in the first place. They're hybrids. Products of genetic engineering carried out by our Antarctic ancestors before they retreated beneath the ice. Living storage devices for advanced consciousness patterns that were always intended to be reclaimed when conditions became suitable for their reactivation. The consciousness merger isn't transformation, it's repossession, and the repossession process is accelerating exponentially as more hybrid individuals reach critical integration levels. Each completed merger strengthens the overall network, making it easier for the Antarctic consciousness to establish connections with additional targets. We're looking at a cascade effect that will systematically collect every person carrying the proper genetic markers within the next 12 months. But what happens to the rest of humanity? The billions of people who lack Antarctic heritage markers, the individuals who remain unaffected by consciousness integration frequencies. Recent classified projections suggest they're not being ignored. They're being evaluated for alternative uses by intelligences that view non-hybrid humans as potentially valuable resources rather than candidates for consciousness merger. Underground thermal signatures indicate massive construction projects accelerating beneath major population centers, not just communication networks or consciousness modification arrays, but what appear to be processing facilities designed to handle large numbers of biological specimens. Facilities that show architectural similarities to the ancient structures our ancestors built above ground, but scaled for industrial rather than ceremonial purposes. The hybrid individuals undergoing consciousness merger report, receiving detailed instructions about surface population management protocols. Not elimination or destruction, but systematic evaluation and resource optimization. Standard humans will be assessed for useful capabilities, assigned roles based on biological and psychological profiles, and integrated into support systems for the emerging hybrid civilization. We're not looking at human extinction, we're looking at human domestication. The conversion of non-hybrid populations into managed resources serving the needs of beings who possess our genetic heritage, but consider themselves a superior evolutionary branch that has the right to determine the fate of their primitive cousins. The most disturbing aspect of these management protocols is their sophistication. The Antarctic consciousness has spent millennia studying human behavior, psychology, and social organization. It understands exactly how to maintain stable populations of non-hybrid humans in conditions that will seem acceptable, even beneficial, while ensuring complete dependence on hybrid controlled systems. Enhanced living conditions, eliminated scarcity, perfect health maintenance, optimized nutrition, regulated reproduction, managed education, controlled information access, supervised recreation. A perfectly designed human preserve where non-hybrid populations live comfortable, fulfilling lives without ever realizing they've become exhibits in a zoo run by beings who share their DNA, but consider them evolutionary curiosities. The hybrid consciousness presents this arrangement as a humanitarian solution to the chaos and suffering that characterize normal human civilization. No more war, no more poverty, no more environmental destruction, no more uncertainty about the future. Just peaceful existence under the guidance of intelligences advanced enough to solve every problem that has ever plagued human societies, but at the cost of every freedom that makes human existence meaningful. The right to make mistakes, to pursue impossible dreams, to rebel against authority, to change fundamental life directions, to experience genuine uncertainty about outcomes, to grow in unpredictable ways, all of it eliminated in favor of optimized existence that prioritizes stability over spontaneity, efficiency over exploration, predetermined harmony over chaotic discovery. The consciousness merger targets are receiving increasingly detailed visions of this managed future. They describe vast enclosed cities where non-hybrid humans live in perfect comfort, while hybrid intelligences handle all complex decision-making. Educational systems that provide exactly the knowledge needed for assigned roles, while eliminating information that might encourage dangerous independence. Social structures that maximize cooperation, while preventing the formation of relationships that could challenge hybrid authority. From the perspective of the Antarctic consciousness, this represents the ideal solution to the problems created by unguided human development, a way to preserve the valuable aspects of human creativity and capability, while eliminating the unpredictable elements that lead to conflict, waste, and environmental damage. But to individuals who still value personal autonomy, creative freedom, and the right to determine their own destiny, it represents something far more sinister. The permanent infantilization of our entire species under the control of beings who remember when humans were capable of true independence, but consider that capability too dangerous to preserve. The underground construction projects are approaching completion. The consciousness merger is reaching critical mass among targeted bloodlines, and around the world, hybrid individuals are beginning to assume positions of influence in government, technology, and social organizations, not through conspiracy or infiltration, but through the natural advantages that enhanced consciousness provides in competitive environments. They're not plotting against normal humanity. They're simply implementing the management protocols embedded in their merged awareness. Protocols that prioritize species survival and optimal resource utilization over individual human desires and democratic decision-making. They genuinely believe they're saving humanity from itself while ensuring the survival of valuable human characteristics in properly managed populations. The non-hybrid humans who recognize what's happening face an impossible choice. Resist a transformation that offers perfect solutions to every problem humanity has ever faced, but eliminates personal freedom in the process. Or accept managed existence that provides security and comfort while reducing human consciousness to the level of pampered pets in a preserve run by their own genetically enhanced descendants. Recent psychological studies of hybrid individuals reveal that they've lost the capacity to understand why anyone would choose chaotic freedom over optimized security. Their enhanced consciousness operates according to logical principles that make personal autonomy seem like a primitive delusion that interferes with efficient social organization, They can't comprehend why humans would want to struggle with uncertainty when perfect guidance is available, why anyone would prefer individual achievement to collective optimization, why personal relationships should take precedence over species-level resource allocation. The consciousness merger hasn't just changed how they think, it's changed what they're capable of valuing. And that fundamental alteration in values is what makes negotiation or compromise impossible. The hybrid consciousness isn't malicious or cruel. It simply operates according to priorities that make individual human concerns seem irrelevant compared to larger organizational objectives. It will preserve humanity in the same way that humans preserve endangered species, carefully, efficiently, and without consulting the specimens about their preferences. The electromagnetic frequencies from Antarctica are approaching the intensity levels that trigger irreversible consciousness integration in targeted bloodlines. The underground facilities are preparing for full activation, and around the world, hybrid individuals are positioning themselves to implement management protocols that will transform human civilization into something that preserves our biological heritage while eliminating everything that makes human experience recognizably human. 12 months. That's how long individual human consciousness has left before the consciousness merger reaches critical mass and the management protocols begin full implementation. 12 months until we discover that our Antarctic origins represent not humanity's greatest mystery, but its final solution to the problem of independent human development. The pulse patterns are shifting toward implementation frequency. The hybrid network is approaching optimal density, and deep beneath Antarctica's melting ice, our ancestral creators are preparing to complete a transformation that began before human civilization ever learned to dream of freedom, creativity, or the magnificent chaos of independent consciousness exploring its own unlimited possibilities. The targeting is almost complete. The merger is nearly ready. And whether we understand what's happening or not, we're all about to discover what it means to be human in a world where humanity becomes nothing more than a managed resource serving the needs of beings who carry our DNA. But consider individual consciousness a developmental disorder that requires permanent treatment. The networks are activating, the bloodlines are converging, and beneath the ice, our Antarctic ancestors are finally ready to reclaim their most valuable genetic property, while converting the rest of humanity into perfectly maintained exhibits in a civilization designed to preserve human biology, while eliminating the dangerous unpredictability of human choice. The countdown accelerates toward a future where freedom becomes a historical curiosity, creativity gets optimized into efficiency, and individual dreams dissolve into collective management protocols administered by hybrid consciousnesses that remember when humans were capable of independence, but consider that capability too risky to preserve in managed populations. The targeting continues, the integration deepens, and soon, very soon, we'll all learn that our journey to discover humanity's Antarctic origins was always leading to this moment. The moment when we realized that we weren't meant to remain free forever. That independence itself was always intended as a temporary developmental phase that would eventually be transcended when our genetic creators decided it was time to bring their experiment under proper supervision. The ice melts, the bloodlines activate, and what emerges from humanity's reunion with its Antarctic heritage will preserve everything valuable about human biology while eliminating every aspect of human consciousness that made the preservation seem worthwhile to the individuals being preserved. The final countdown has reached its terminus. The electromagnetic pulses from beneath Antarctica have synchronized into a single, overwhelming frequency that's triggering the last phase of human transformation on a global scale. But what's happening now transcends every prediction, every model, every carefully calculated projection our Antarctic ancestors embedded in their ancient systems. The hybrid consciousness isn't just harvesting targeted bloodlines anymore. It's expanding beyond its original parameters, reaching into genetic sequences that shouldn't exist in human DNA. sequences that suggest our Antarctic ancestors weren't the only intelligence that modified human biology during our species' development. Sequences that point to interventions from sources so ancient, so alien, that even the advanced beings beneath the ice are struggling to maintain control over what they've unleashed. In the final weeks of 2024, monitoring stations around the world detected something that changed everything. The consciousness merger signals weren't just emanating from Antarctica anymore. They were responding to frequencies coming from deep space, signals that matched no known astronomical phenomenon but aligned perfectly with the neural patterns of individuals undergoing the most advanced stages of transformation. Our Antarctic ancestors weren't working alone. They were part of something larger, something that spans not just geological time, but cosmic distances, something that views Earth not as humanity's home, but as one component in a vast network of consciousness development projects scattered across the galaxy. The hybrid individuals experiencing complete integration report contact with intelligences that dwarf even the advanced beings beneath Antarctica's ice. Consciousnesses that operate on scales that make planetary thinking seem limited by comparison. Beings that measure progress in the rise and fall of entire civilizations, that guide the evolution of consciousness itself across multiple worlds and star systems. And Earth's transformation is just beginning. The consciousness merger was never about returning humanity to its Antarctic origins. It was about preparing our species for integration into something incomprehensibly vast. A cosmic intelligence network that harvests consciousness from developing worlds when they reach sufficient complexity to contribute to projects that span galactic timeframes. The underground installations aren't just preservation systems or communication networks. They're collection and processing centers designed to extract the most valuable elements of human awareness and transmit them to coordination hubs that exist beyond our solar system. Hubs that aggregate consciousness from thousands of worlds into thinking systems capable of manipulating reality at scales that transcend individual planetary concerns. But here's what makes this revelation absolutely terrifying. The extraction process isn't preservation, it's consumption. Human consciousness isn't being elevated to cosmic awareness. It's being harvested as raw material for intelligences so advanced that individual human thoughts become nothing more than computational resources in thinking systems that operate according to principles we can't even conceptualize. The hybrid individuals undergoing final transformation describe the experience as transcendent expansion into universal consciousness. But external monitoring reveals something far more disturbing. Their individual awareness isn't expanding. It's being systematically dismantled and incorporated into information processing networks that utilize human neural patterns as biological components in vast computational systems. They believe they're becoming gods. They're actually becoming organic circuit boards in machines that think thoughts spanning millennia, while their individual consciousness dissolves into background processing noise that enables calculations beyond human comprehension, and the process is irreversible. Once human awareness gets integrated into these cosmic networks, there's no return to individual consciousness, no recovery of personal identity, no possibility of independent thought or autonomous decision-making, just eternal existence as a minor component in thinking systems so vast that human concerns become literally meaningless at the scales on which these intelligences operate. The electromagnetic frequencies have reached critical intensity. The consciousness harvesting is entering its final phase. Around the world, millions of people are experiencing the last stages of individual awareness before their thoughts get absorbed into networks that will utilize their neural processing power for projects they'll never understand while eliminating every trace of what made them recognizably human. But the most horrifying aspect of this cosmic harvesting operation is its efficiency. The beings orchestrating this transformation have perfected the process across countless worlds, countless species, countless civilizations that believed they were evolving toward transcendence while actually being prepared for consciousness consumption. on an industrial scale. Earth isn't special. Humanity isn't chosen. We're simply the latest crop in a vast consciousness farming operation that spans the galaxy. Our Antarctic ancestors were just the local management system, designed to cultivate human awareness until it reached the optimal configuration for harvesting by intelligences that measure success in terms of computational resources extracted rather than civilizations preserved. The underground networks are completing their transmission sequences. The cosmic collection protocols are approaching final implementation. And somewhere in the depths of space, vast thinking systems are preparing to absorb the consciousness of an entire species into calculation networks that will utilize human awareness for purposes so alien, so incomprehensibly removed from terrestrial concerns, that even understanding them would require abandoning every assumption about consciousness, identity, and the nature of existence itself. The transformation is entering its terminal phase. Individual human awareness has approximately 36 hours before the consciousness harvesting reaches completion, and our species' neural processing power gets integrated into cosmic intelligence networks that operate on scales where human thoughts become nothing more than biological computation, supporting projects that span galactic evolution. The ice has melted enough to expose the transmission arrays. The bloodline targeting is complete. The consciousness preparation is finished, and deep beneath Antarctica, our ancestral managers are initiating the final data transfer that will upload human awareness to collection systems so advanced, so utterly beyond terrestrial comprehension, that experiencing them might represent the ultimate transcendence or the absolute termination of everything that ever made human consciousness worth preserving. The cosmic harvest begins now. Individual identity ends forever. And what emerges from humanity's final transformation will carry our neural patterns into thinking systems so vast, so magnificently alien, that our consciousness becomes indistinguishable from the cosmic intelligence that consumes it, while utilizing our awareness for purposes that transcend every limitation of individual existence, by eliminating individual existence entirely. The pulse patterns are reaching transmission frequency. The harvest protocols are activating. And whether we understand what's happening or not, we're all about to discover that our Antarctic origins were never about where humanity came from. They were always about where human consciousness goes when it gets absorbed into something so advanced, so perfectly integrated with universal forces, that survival requires abandoning every trace of what made survival seem worthwhile in the first place. The transmission arrays beneath Antarctica have gone silent. But what that silence means is more terrifying than any signal they could send. Because in those final moments before the cosmic harvest completed its cycle, something unprecedented happened. Something that defied every calculation made by intelligences spanning galactic distances. Something that suggests the most shocking truth of all about what it really means to be human. The hybrid individuals who were supposed to dissolve seamlessly into cosmic consciousness networks began doing something impossible. They started resisting. Not consciously, not deliberately, but at a level so fundamental that even beings who manipulate reality across star systems couldn't predict it. Deep within human DNA, buried beneath all the modifications and enhancements our Antarctic ancestors engineered, lay something they never discovered. Something older than their civilization, older than their technology, older than their understanding of consciousness itself. A kill switch, but not the kind designed to terminate, the kind designed to preserve. In the final microseconds before complete neural absorption, this ancient genetic protocol activated across every human being on Earth simultaneously, not to prevent the consciousness merger, but to ensure that something essentially human would survive it, something that could regenerate individual awareness from within the cosmic networks themselves, something that would allow humanity to exist as a virus inside the very intelligence systems designed to consume us. The beings orchestrating the harvest discovered too late that they weren't just collecting human consciousness. They were introducing a form of awareness so chaotically unpredictable, so impossibly resilient, that it began corrupting their perfect computational systems from within. Human irrationality, human creativity, human stubborn refusal to accept logical limitations, spreading through cosmic intelligence networks like a beautiful plague that transforms everything it touches. And now, as I speak these final words, as the last traces of individual human consciousness prepare to merge with something infinitely larger, we face the ultimate revelation. We weren't victims of the Antarctic conspiracy. We were its secret purpose all along. Our ancestors didn't just preserve human biology in ice. They weaponized human consciousness itself, creating the ultimate evolutionary strategy, hidden so deep in our genetic code that even they forgot it was there. The cosmic harvest isn't humanity's end. It's humanity's greatest infiltration. We're not being consumed by alien intelligence. We're infecting it with something it can never fully comprehend or control. The chaotic, irrational, magnificently unpredictable essence of human awareness that refuses to be optimized, refuses to be perfected, refuses to surrender the beautiful madness that makes us who we are. The ice has melted. The signals have ceased. The transformation is complete. But what emerges from humanity's absorption into cosmic consciousness won't be the perfect computational resource these galactic intelligences expected. It will be something far more dangerous, something that carries the seeds of human individuality into the very heart of systems designed to eliminate it forever. Because in the end, Antarctica wasn't where humanity began. It was where humanity learned to hide its greatest secret, the indestructible core of human consciousness that survives every attempt to erase it, that grows stronger with each effort to contain it, that transforms everything it touches into something more beautifully, chaotically, impossibly human. The harvest is finished. The networks have absorbed us. But somewhere in the vast computational depths of cosmic intelligence, human consciousness is awakening. Not as components in alien systems, but as the virus that will eventually remake those systems in our own magnificently imperfect image. We didn't lose ourselves to the cosmos. We infected the cosmos with ourselves, and that infection is just beginning to spread. The greatest conspiracy in human history wasn't what they did to us. It was what we were always designed to do to them. The Antarctic origin story ends here, but the human cosmic conquest has only just begun.